Finally, I want to talk about the prescription drug supply chain. That's a different animal. I know for employers, it's not the biggest spend, but it's the fastest growing spend. And there's a lot of attention here, and frankly, a little bit of controversy in this area too, in terms of what's happened. And some of it is the underlying, frankly, the underlying emergence of very innovative drugs and very expensive drugs, specialty drugs. How are employers viewing specialty drugs? The emergence of these highly expensive, but in some instances very highly effective drugs that are coming out.
And I think there is a lot of concern because of this increased cost. But if you sit back and look at it on how are you reducing the medical spend, and I'll pick on the hepatitis C drugs. Everybody was worried about this, and we saw, an uptick in the hepatitis C drugs. But then afterwards, once people got treated, it went down, and the medical claims followed too. So those that are curative are great. Those for chronic diseases that are, more disease-modifying, things like this, they have to take for life, still concerning. But it's just if we look at the medical spend, we may still be saving some money. So it's looking at that total cost of care versus just a silo of the pharmacy.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's good news and bad news. Certainly, some of the drugs that are high-cost drugs that our members are taking are saving on the medical side. They absolutely are. Oncology, I'm not so sure, because with all the development in oncology drugs, two things are happening, at least in our population. It is extending a period of disability, and it is really not eliminating an ultimate outcome. So I don't know much about the quality of life in between, but I do know that cancer has moved for us to a chronic disease. Yep. And it is being managed with very high cost, generally speaking, infused drugs that I just don't know if they're the answer. So I think that's something that I would need more information about.
Yep.
I think it's a real ethical dilemma, especially in the setting of cancer. How much how much is acceptable for an employer to spend to prolong life, disability or no disability? And where should that line be drawn to say this is cost prohibitive, or if you want to purchase this, you can using your dollars, but we as the employer are not going to pay for it. That's such a sensitive issue that I don't know that we have any easy answers for that just yet.
And I'm not sure it's an employer issue. I think it's a ethical, medical world issue. Yeah. How much care is too much care?
Yeah. Well, it is interesting to that point. At some level, employers have kind of ceded the determinations on this to their intermediaries, PBMs, and in some instances, health plans. Mm-hmm. What is the role of that intermediary, and how are they performing generally as it relates to drug management? I know we hear some noise, but I'm wondering what you've observed.
Yeah, I think it is difficult because I think you said it is some of these used to be acute diseases that ended up with death, now are chronic diseases. HIV's along that line too. And so I think people are starting to still try to figure out what that endpoint should be. And it's probably even going to get worse as we look at genetic testing of tumors, things like that, where you may treat, it may be in the stomach, but you have to treat it like it's, I'll say breast, cancer. And so some of this personalized medicine based upon the genetic markers of these tumors is going to even complicate it even more. So I don't know, so the jury's still out on this, and I think it's going to get more murky before it ever gets clear.
Yep. I will take a slightly cynical view of the intermediaries, although they're a necessary evil. I would say if they didn't exist, we'd have to invent them. So, but albeit that they all tout P&T committees and that they're constantly looking at clinical efficacy and that comes first, and it's an economic decision at the end of the game. It just is. You know, we had a drug moved from tier 2 to tier 3, a specialty drug with no alternatives, and we say, why? If there's no alternative, the whole purpose of tiering on a formulary is to drive to a lower cost alternative. There isn't any. I think it's because they weren't getting any rebates. That's the cynical part of me. But again, they're necessary. It's a very complicated purchase. It's a very complicated business to manage, and I'd admit that we need them.
Certainly from a philosophical standpoint, we have new technologies in the laboratory that are enabling the development of new categories of drugs that we didn't know we could even or could even exist. Those come at a cost. I think it's incumbent upon us as employers and coalitions to push back, much in the same way that we are on the medical side trying to find ways to align our mutual interests, to do the same on the pharmacy side, to find that value and ensure that our purchase of those more expensive drugs is contingent upon those drugs providing value at the patient level.